guys, Chari5 here, and today we are ending Novel Week with Annie Wilkes from Stephen King's novel Misery. When exactly this novel came out and when the movie came out, I don't exactly know. Along with Psycho and Norman Bates, which neither one of us ended up doing, we both ended up doing Janet Leigh's character. Along with that, though, Annie Wilkes was another character that I suggested we do because we couldn't really come up with a lot of characters from... because I wanted to have a theme every week, as I usually do. And I was trying to think, like, okay, well, we have movies, but there are a ton of horror movies. What was week 2? Oh, cutesy week. Well, we had enough for cutesy week. We had enough cute characters. And another thing was, well, okay, but what else could we do? And that's when I figured, well, novels, right? Because I feel like there were too many movie monsters, so it would be kind of unfair to do like 2 movie monster weeks. So I figured, you know what? Let's do a novel week. That way we can have an excuse to have these, characters who we know from movies, but they started out as book characters. And unfortunately, there were some instances, for example, in The Exorcist, where they were technically novel characters first. I just didn't know it until after the fact. And we do know them better from films. Like, for example, I think The Shining is another example of characters we know better from films than from the novels. In fact, a lot of characters from Novel Week have their own movies. I think all of them do. Yeah, I do. Actually, yeah, I do think they all have their own movies. And that's mostly where I know them from. And Annie Wilkes is actually a little bit of a special entry on the list because I think it's one of the, if not the lesser known character on the list. I don't think I know too many people that know about the movie Misery, starring Kathy Bates. And I don't exactly remember how I came to know it. I've never seen the film. How many times have I said that throughout Creepy Month? But the cool thing is, like, despite the fact that I haven't seen the film, I'm still, familiar enough with the character that I thought to suggest her, because I think it might have been through like commercials on television or something that I saw some of the scenes from this movie, and then I'd see it through, like, horror lists on YouTube, like, oh, top 10 whatever characters from horror, or top horror movies, or whatever. And Annie Wilkes is, I think, a super, super, super interesting character in this. Again, as with a lot of, I think I've been saying that a lot with the characters from Novel Week, more so than the characters from Movie Monster Week. Especially because I think the ones for Movie Monster Week are more fun than they are interesting. Because there's really nothing to them. Yes, they have a backstory and everything, but their backstories end up being kind of silly and just there for the sake of entertainment. Whereas I think novel monsters are more of a psychological fear. Especially because since you're reading since it involves reading, I think that's probably also what it is with me. You're reading the novel, and you have something in your imagination. I don't know if you guys have the same thing, but when I read, which isn't very often, I'm not going to lie, not that I don't like reading, I feel like I have to invest a lot of time in reading something. And half the time, I have a hard time paying attention to what it is I am reading. So I just end up reading it and then having to read the same paragraph 2 or 3 times before I'm actually paying attention to it. But the reason I think, I don't know if you guys ever do it, but when you're reading a novel, do you ever, like, imagine, like, in a very picturesque or maybe even a movie-style way, what the events going on, how they're developing? That sentence was structured really strangely. Do you ever envision what you're reading, is what I'm asking. Because I do that a lot. Whenever I'm reading, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I mean, I'm guessing that's what you're supposed to do. I just feel like maybe not everyone has that sort of sense of, oh, yeah, I'm imagining it. More so they're just like, okay, well, yeah, I get what it's supposed to be, but I don't bother thinking about it. And I feel like that's what a lot of, not just, they don't just do it for the characters, but they do it for, the settings as well. But mostly for the characters. So in this case, it's funny that there's kind of a double meaning when it comes to Annie Wilkes. And in all these novel monsters in general, which is, they have a more psychological aspect to them. You're imagining the kind of life they live and why they are who they are. They're not just simple movie monsters that maybe appear on screen a few times, maybe you get some exposition on them, but they're really just there to be scary instead of, really being a threat. I mean, they are a threat, but here, with more psychological villains, you get that sense of dread even more, I think. And again, Annie Wilkes is a very unique case because Misery, for those of you that don't know, and as far as I can understand, is about this author who, I don't know if Annie invites him or if he just appears at Annie's house or what happens exactly, but he ends up at her house, and Annie turns out to be a huge fan of the author and ends up torturing him because she doesn't like the way his last novel ended, and she demands he rewrite the novel and basically tortures him until he does. And I think that's such a really, because you have to keep in mind, this isn't really a new movie. But I think its idea still really holds up in terms of, like, fandoms. We have so many fandoms nowadays for so many different things that it's not out of the realm of possibility, but it is pretty scary to think that maybe one of those fans could potentially do that to a creator who, wants to write a story their own way, and sometimes the fans just aren't content with that. And we just get into these fits of just really stupid rage over something insignificant such as entertainment, because that's all, these things are. They're entertainment. We have no reason to get upset over them. I get upset in this, like, in a very satirical maybe sense, for lack of a better word. Like, I'm not genuinely upset over it. I'm not gonna lose sleep over it, but it's one of those things where I like being upset about stuff as insignificant as video games or as movies, because I don't know, I feel like in the end, who cares? Right? I feel like it's just one of those things where you're living day to day, and I like getting happy and sad over small things. Well, okay, I make that sound way worse than I mean it to, but what I mean is, like, getting passionate about those small things because it's irrelevant. Who cares? It's for fun. And I know in my mind that it doesn't matter. And she's another case, much like Hannibal Lecter, where she is a smart woman. And that's another thing, as I've said before, that I think is pretty scary. Because, like, when a smart person loses a few screws, or has a few screws loose, rather, bad things can really happen. Because I think the thing is that she's a nurse, so, it's implied that she killed a bunch of patients from the hospital she used to work at. And as a result, she also knows a lot about, I think she might be inspired by an actual serial killer that used to do stuff like that. That was a nurse and started killing people, at the hospital, and no one really realized it. I don't know if that's what she's inspired on or not, but I kind of saw the relation a little bit there. But, to me, she always, just the idea behind that, like a super fan that, because I never saw the movie and I only, like, looked up some of the information, I always assumed that she was just, like, a very capable woman, but at the same time kind of had the mind of a child, in the sense that, like, she got obsessed over small things like that. I think her personality has been described as obsessive, and, it's sort of personalities like that to an extent, I can sort of relate to, and at the same time, are still sort of scary to me and sort of creepy. I think creepy is more so the word, more so than scary, because creepy, not so much. I mean, sorry, the other way around. They are creepy, but they're not that scary. The idea behind it is a bit more frightening than it is, like, terrorizing. But yeah, like, I've always, ever since I've seen, like, this character be described, I have found it very interesting. And the ironic thing is, it started as a book. Like, it wasn't the idea of, oh, we're going to make a movie where, there's an author. No, an author actually wrote about, being an author and being, kidnapped by a fan. And the things she does to him, Jesus. A lot of people might remember, if you've seen this film, the hammer scene, which is what I'm trying to draw, sort of. The movie was starring Kathy Bates, who I think is a fantastic actress. I think everything I've ever seen her in, she always gets a laugh out of me. She can do a lot of things very well. And it's funny because I'd never thought about her as, like, a horror movie villain or character at all, much less a villain. But, like, even as a character at all, I'd never seen her as that. And then I find out that she was a horror movie villain, and that kind of blows you away, considering that she's usually always, maybe not the good guy, but she's never the bad guy. And so to be the bad guy in this film is very interesting, and I think, at least from what I've seen, she does a hell of a good job with it too. But she can also play, like, the every person, which I think it's just an array of talents that Kathy Bates has, and I really wanted to try to do my best to try to maybe push the realism and get it looking like her as much as I could. And while I like the eye on the right, it's when I got to shading that I didn't know what it was that I wanted to do. The reason I had a bit more of an easy time with Janet Leigh in Psycho was because already the scene is set in black and white, so I know basically what some shades should look like. And in this case, because it has a lot of color and certainly a lot of contrast, like, I had a hard time, like, okay, how dark should this part of the skin be? How dark should I make the mallet compared to the skin and stuff like that? But yeah, it certainly wasn't easy, because I wasn't really I really wasn't feeling it when I started out, and then as I kept going, I was like, okay, I like this part. This, I think, looks fine, but now this is bothering me, and what do I do? And I really don't know where I stand with this piece. A lot of people say they like it, but I mean, if you do, thank you. I appreciate it. I just personally can see plenty flaws with it, and I wish that I could correct them, but part of the challenge, can't undo anything, and can't edit anything digitally either. So I'm only working with what I got. But what do you think of this movie? Have you ever seen it? Would you recommend me watching it? I certainly do want to watch this one. Probably out of all the ones that I've done for Novel Week, Misery's probably one of the movies I've wanted to watch the most, if only because I find studying the personalities and the psyches, or the psyche? I don't know if that's an all-encompassing term, but the psyche of these villains and, like, why they're so interesting and why they become what they become, killers. Yeah, that's basically it, killers. I can't really describe them as much else, considering that that's the one thing that they have in common. But this is the final piece. I think it's a little bit too bright. Maybe I could have done a little bit more with the contrast, but I was incredibly tired, and so incredibly tired that you might notice that I'm uploading this with the next one as well, which is we will be starting, actually, Doll Week. And I think already you know what we're going to be kicking off with. And yes, we do have an entire week dedicated to just dolls from horror movies or just horror. I think most of these, if not all of them, are actually from horror movies. But, yeah, there are a lot of them. So, tomorrow, we will be, well, I guess today, whatever, breaking the illusion of time, we will be starting off with everybody's favorite good guy. See you then, guys.